Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab. If you've listened before, then you know our goal is conversations that empower healthy churches. And so we love connecting with all sorts of people to that goal. My name's Scott, half of your hosting responsibilities, and Casey is the other half. Hello, Casey.
Hi, Scott. Responsibilities sounds like very official.
I know. Sounds very adult, very mature. Like
none of those things which we are.
Well, yeah, we try our hardest sometimes.
And it's a tough job. It's full of responsibilities.
It is, but it's our responsibility. So we're gonna do our best. And today, we're super excited to have a conversation with Todd Rukes. Todd is the founder and president of Rukes Search Group, a staffing firm for churches and nonprofits. He has over a decade of ministry experience in various roles, from a worship pastor, director of human resource, executive pastor, senior director of communications. And he comes with a background as a worship leader, musical artist. He's actually recorded multiple albums and led worship in churches, over 100 churches throughout the U.S., Canada. And before full-time ministry, Todd completed 2 undergraduate degrees in worship music ministry and business marketing, and also completed an MBA in leadership, all from Liberty University. In his spare time, Todd loves to play with his kids, watching and playing basketball, reading, writing, and recording music. He and his wife, Rachel, and their 3 sons live in the home of the greatest pizza in the world, the Chicago area, Chicago suburbs. And we're super excited, Todd, to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm pumped.
Yeah. Well, we usually like to start with this question. I know that's the public bio we just read, and there's all sorts of good stuff there, but there's usually something that doesn't make the public bio that all your friends, your family would know about you. So for you, what is that thing?
Well, I think one of those things would be, and it's surprising the most, but I used to be in a rap group.
That's amazing.
Say more immediately.
Yes, please.
As I was first getting into music, there was, this was around high school. This is a long time ago. I was in a rap group, and, it was nothing special, but it's been funny to see how writing raps has continued through my career. And so there's been different opportunities for, Good Friday services and other opportunities at the church where there'd be a spoken word element or a rap element. And it was always, oh, Todd will write that. Todd will write that. So I've become like the rap guy, which is the funniest thing in the world. So those who are closest to me would have a little more context for that.
I love it. I got to imagine anyone who's done staffing searches would, if there was like that game, 2 Truths and a Lie, and and you'd be like, I'm actually a really good rap artist. They'd be like, that's not true. Like, it is.
I didn't say I was good.
Well, that's true. I made that assumption myself.
I just want to know how in the world you made the leap from music to HR, because those are things that do not often go together at all. So I think rap might be like, that's the common bond, right? That's what brought you 2 together.
It froze up a little bit, Avi, there. I don't know if I caught the rest of that.
Yeah, you froze a little bit, Casey. What did you say?
I was just saying, I've never seen music and HR connected. So maybe that's the common bond, is like secretly every HR manager loves rap. They just don't know how to pronounce that. So
after meeting a lot of HR directors, I could confidently say that's probably not the case.
You are the one. You're the one guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. But no, it was, even going from worship to, HR was, sounds like such a, leap, but, we could dive into all that, but that's, some of the things that I think the Lord, kind of worked through me, and some of the doors he opened in worship kind of translated into some of the principles of HR. And, I've always had a passion for, organizational leadership and staff structure and things like that. And so, everybody chuckles when I kind of tell them my journey. I always say, I'm a worship leader turned HR director turned staff recruiter. So I was, I was just in a workshop down at an Experience conference teaching a bunch of worship leaders, and I had them raise their hand if any of the worship leaders were interested in going into HR, and none of them raised their hand. So the Lord's had an interesting journey for me for sure, but I've loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
not
awesome.
the most natural segue, I would think, but that does sound like a whole different story. But I mean, now that you mention it, staffing and HR, like that's what you do. So what is the current state? What is happening in not just staffing, but specifically in ministry? Should everybody be freaking out? Are we good? Like, what is going on in church staffing?
Yeah, well, we shouldn't be panicking, that's for sure. But, as everybody's seen, COVID's had a lot of effects on just the staffing industry in general. And, we're seeing fewer candidates and more openings would be kind of the ultimate summary. And, you could dive into why there are fewer candidates. I think there's a large population in the baby boomers that are retiring. I think there's a lot of people, experimenting with other things and doing, other things, starting a staff search firm, and, it might not look like being full-time in a church, but maybe part-time in a church. And I'm going to have another thing, or maybe I'm just going to, provide for my family in a different way and just serve my church. We're also seeing in the up and coming generations, there's just less college graduates that are going into ministry. So there's 3 or 4 things I think happening that are resulting in, fewer candidates. But I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think I think we'll see kind of a pendulum swing back the other way eventually. It'll be interesting to see how many people come back to ministry, that maybe tried something for a season outside of ministry. I think we're seeing even a little bit of that now. But yeah, the bottom line is, as church leaders, we can't panic. And we just have to start thinking a little differently about our staffing structure, our ministry strategy. Maybe that means fewer staff, but those staff, you pay more, or, have them oversee more volunteers, pour some more energy in developing leaders within your church. There are ways to kind of get through the season that could be really effective for the church. And I think as leaders right now, we just got to think outside the box. The last few years have disrupted a lot, and what has worked in our churches the last 20 years aren't really working right now. And so how do we work smarter, not harder? So there's for sure a disruption in the staffing industry, but I would say it doesn't mean that it has to slow down the ministry in the churches.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious too, because sometimes when disruptions like that happen, we actually step into, and it can take some time, but you step into like a better way as a result. So some of those things that you talked about, some of the maybe necessary changes that are happening, like from your vantage point, are you seeing some of that and seeing like, actually, this is a good thing, and it may even make the church more resilient for, the days and the years to come?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned, I think one of those shifts that I'm seeing in churches is elevating more volunteer positions. And how do we get more of the people to carry the load in our church? And, that impacts the job descriptions of the staff members. And, I'm seeing staffing, staff org charts get a little bit leaner in that way. But it doesn't mean that the work is going away. It just means that we're sharing the load a little bit more with the people in our church. I think, there's some churches have let go of some different ministries to really focus in on other ministries. So instead of us doing 10 things, pretty well, we're going to do 5 things really well. And that's actually going to increase our engagement even more over time. There's the churches that I think are having the most, success or, growing the most right now, I think are thinking along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that, it's obviously there can be some fear. There can be some, whenever we change from this is how it's always been to whatever, is next. I know that can cause that, but I think that is encouraging to hear, but there's some good things as well. And it could, cause some realignment that actually strengthens the church and ministry, for the long haul. So
I like that you mentioned doing less, but doing it better. I don't know about Scott and Todd, but I grew up in a church that you did everything. There's like a ministry for everything. There's a camp, there's a thing there. There's just something almost every night of the week. And now, at least my church now, it's like, I know exactly who our community partners are. I know exactly what the core, ministries are. And it's not a lot, but they're so strong. And I know I could probably name exactly what they are. And I think that says a lot because we do them really well. And they're so ingrained in our culture of why my church is existing in my community, to be able to, in one sentence, like, "Ooh, I know what we're about," rather than if it's 100 things, I can't even express that. I know exactly what we're doing. So I think it's really interesting you talked about that. When you know exactly who you are, you can do it efficiently and communicate it well. And it's like ingrained in just why your doors are even open. So they might stay open a little bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, simplicity, when it's done right, has great effects. And I think if you can simplify, Life Church and Craig Rochelle, they were ahead of the game. They did this years ago. They decided we're only going to do 5 things. And I won't try to name them because I'll miss a few or something, but they just decided we're only going to do these 5 things. So whenever a new ministry opportunity comes up, whenever a new event opportunity comes up, if it doesn't fit into one of these buckets, we're not doing it. And it took a lot of discipline because everybody has great ideas and, but they just decided to focus in on those 5 things. And I think we're seeing that a little bit now, in just how we're shifting our ministry focus.
Yeah. Now, as you've been working with churches, not only do you kind of have that experience of being on staff yourself, but also then working to staff churches, working with church leaders. What are some of those common denominators that you've seen that makes a healthy church staff?
Yeah, I think a few that I would say is one would just be trust. There's a high sense of trust between staff members, between the leaders and staff. The gap between wondering if I can trust you is really small. And, I've seen, different staffs achieve that in different ways. Very intentional about building relationships with each other. Communication is a regular ongoing thing. There's things you can do to breed trust, obviously integrity and some of those other things as well. I think the healthiest of staffs are, they just have a high level of trust, within the organization or the church. Another thing I think is clarity. And when I say clarity, I mean clarity of not just the mission or the vision, but how you're going to achieve that. There's nothing more frustrating than staff wondering what our priorities should be. What are we doing? What's our process? And I think the churches that are, thriving the most in staff culture, they just have that really crystal clear, and they constantly communicate it. The why and the how, the why and the how. I heard one time, when you're communicating, your mission, your vision, and your values, always communicate it twice as much as you think you should, and then triple it. So you can never communicate enough. But I see oftentimes, just leaders in general just don't communicate, that clarity enough. But I think it breeds a healthy culture. I think the third thing I would say is that standards are upheld. So not only are the standards known and the values known or the expectations known, but the church or the organization rewards what they want more of, and they coach what they don't want more of. And when other staff members see that the place is putting their money where their mouth is and is living out, and these aren't just values that are plastered on a wall, we're actually living these things out. That invigorates people and excites people to be a part of something like that. So those are a few things that I would say. Yeah,
that clarity piece is huge, because I think that too, sometimes it can be, well, this is the mission, this is the vision, this is where we're all kind of collectively going. But that individual clarity too, like, what's my part in that? What's the role I play? What does it look like to succeed in that? And where is that going? Like, that's a tremendous piece as well, to have that kind of individual buy-in from staff who then come together for the collective mission and vision.
Yeah, well, especially now more than ever. I mean, not to keep harping on COVID, but, after COVID or during COVID, people woke up and they all of a sudden looked at their job description and was like, wait, that's not my job description anymore. This doesn't exist. This doesn't exist. And now more than ever, it's important to, evaluate your job descriptions and make it really clear for the staff member of, what are they supposed to be doing? What are their priorities? And, that's one thing when we were doing a few webinars around COVID that we were just hammering, make your job descriptions clear, even if it's just for this next season, just make it clear. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Well, and if our staff doesn't have clarity, our congregants sure aren't.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely.
It bleeds kind of throughout the organization, the church and ministry, for sure. Now I know that, as we talked about, there's been a lot of people who have said, hey, this is, I want to step out of this as far as ministry. And some are step out, do something different. Some are, I want to kind of move to a bivocational thing. But anyway, I think that there's been a lot of that transition. And I think that's not always something that's handled the best when it comes to transitioning or even processing, thinking about transitioning out of ministry. So what are some of those, specifically, what are some of those mistakes maybe that you've seen pastors make when a staff member is considering transitioning off staff? And I think the part B to that question is, how can we do a better job of handling those situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's certainly a good topic, especially over the last few years with just all the resignations. I think I would say two main things that I see, and they're kind of opposite extremes from each other. And it's kind of simply put, but either, the pastor, the leader holds too tight a fist, or they hold too loose a fist. Mm-hmm. So, somebody comes, hey, I'm leaving, the super tight fisted approach would be, you start handling the situation as if loyalty to a place or loyalty to a person outweighs what's best for the person. Yeah. Right. And it becomes just too, rigid and, but you need to be here for this amount of time. And, then things get a little weird, a little wonky.
A little.
But I think that could be a temptation. And, I do have a lot of empathy for pastors. I think in a lot of ways, being a pastor right now is nearly an impossible task, and kind of wake up each day right now with a new set of bad news. So, we're all human, and, I can get some of our, initial inclinations, but I would say the other side of that would be holding too loose of a fist. So where you're almost too passive about it. I think you want a level of leaning in, of really understanding why the individual, is thinking about that. Is there something that, we can learn as a church, that we can learn as a leadership team that can, prevent maybe you from leaving? Maybe we can fix something. Maybe we can prevent the next person from leaving and, leaning in and seeing if you could really, salvage the situation, so to speak, or create a better path for that individual, and then make the necessary adjustments as you need to. But really, caring for the individual. And I think sometimes we can conflate caring for the individual with not leaning in to the individual. It's like, oh, they want to leave, that's fine. We can. They can go wherever, we're all the kingdom of God. It's like, yes, that's true. But let's really understand our people, and lean in those moments. So,
well, I think that leaning in, especially I get if somebody's at the point where they're like, hey, I've made the decision, whatever, I'm moving on. That's one thing. But because ministry is unique, like if you're working a job, that's your place of employment, right? That's essentially what it is. But ministry is your place of employment, your community, your spiritual home, your all of those things wrapped in one. And so sometimes I think too, just not having that space to process through that, you know, if somebody's considering leaving their job, they can typically talk with their friends and say, yeah, so I'm thinking about, I'm not sure. That's a challenge to do in ministry. And so I think that's a great point, is like making space for that, because that's the only place people have. And if they don't, then sometimes they can make a decision that they may not be the best decision in the end, but they weren't able to really work through that with their pastor or their community.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you're right, especially if the person's staying at the church, you know, there's an extra layer there of, this isn't just a staff member. This is still, you know, a member of our congregation. And, you know, it can be a interesting transition to go from staff and, you know, seeing all the good, bad, uglies of, you know, church staff world, and then going to, you know, not being staff, but attending the church, you know, and you've kind of seen it all. And I think it just takes an extra layer of intentionality around that person. You know, who's their small group leader? Who are they plugged in with? You know, how can we come around them? How can we care for them? You know, we used to talk a lot about that when I was an HR director. You know, HR in the church is just different. You know, I've seen a lot of HR directors transition from the marketplace into the church, and it doesn't always go well because it's just a different thing, you know, for the reasons that you've already stated.
Yeah. Well, you just kind of read my mind, Todd. I was thinking about how unique your background is to come out of ministry, but also that business side, the HR side. And you said it before, the job of a pastor is almost impossible. So, I mean, you do have this very spiritual component, this coaching, counseling, spiritual guidance, but then you're also, you have some compliance issues and people issues. Like, do you ever wish you could kind of like wave a wand and teach, or kind of like ingrain into every pastor how to be just a little bit better on that human resource operational side, so that when these hard conversations happen, they happen in a way that is healing? It doesn't have to be that icky, oh gosh, I can't come to church here anymore, and I just lost my whole social network, but also my place of worship, but also my employment. Like, it gets really icky really quickly. Absolutely. And, you know, I've talked with a number of pastors about that, you know, and it's kind of this two-sided coin of, you know, it's a place of employment, and there are real HR best practices and, you know, things that are the systems, but there's a layer of a pastoral ability to go along with that. And, you know, I think it's a big need. You know, I was just talking with someone yesterday of, you know, a lot of pastors come out of seminary, they don't get taught how to handle an HR situation. You know, where do they go? You know, they're thrown into the deep end to have to figure out, you know, all of a sudden, you know, they are a preacher, they are a theologian, and all of a sudden they need to be an organizational leader. They need to be able to have high communication ability, dynamic ability. They need to be able to handle very nuanced people management problems. So I think you're right. I think that's where it comes down to, you know, it's really impossible, you know, in some senses, to be great at all of those things. And so that's where I think the team aspect comes in, right? Like we got to shape our teams to kind of cover all these bases and grow in those areas that, you know, we can maybe prevent some of these things. I think, go ahead. You forgot IT director and social media manager and music leader and janitor and parking. Like, you forgot a couple of those jobs while you're out there, but you know. Yeah, exactly. Well, the same is true on the other side, you know, for, you know, HR directors who are, you know, is very process driven, very systems focused. They need to grow a little bit in their people management, their people ability, and you know, even a little bit of shepherding. You know, I think HR is just as much of a pastoral role than
than somebody who has a title pastor. I mean, it doesn't get more people focused than HR, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand. We just, we gotta just come to that, kind of middle ground where we're, making sure we're thinking about all these things. But I think to answer part B to your question, Scott, I think we got to realign our expectations in this time. I think leaders really got to kind of rethink, just realistic expectations for staff. So I think we got to understand our culture right now. We got to understand the up and coming generations. It used to be you'd be at a place for 10 to 20 years. And that was a normal thing. I mean, it used to be you'd be at a place for 40 years,
Yeah.
And right now I'm telling pastors, expect this candidate to give a good 3 to 5 years,
Wow.
Yeah.
How do pastors receive that? I mean, seriously, if you said that to me, what is the most common reaction when you say that to a pastor? They go, "Excuse me, what?"
Honestly, the biggest reaction I see is relief, because it kind of lets them off the hook of it. I think they put this weight on themselves that, I have to build this perfect team that's going to be with me for 50 years.
Yeah.
I think to hear it's okay to have someone for a season, and they bring the thing to the next level and set it up for the next person to bring it to the next season,
Yep.
Now we're going to do everything we can to give a runway for a staff member to be there for 10 years, 15 years, but we have to be just realistic with up and coming generations and some of the trends we're seeing, and just the market in general with, there's going to be fewer candidates out there, and they might want to try something different eventually, but if they could give you 4 solid years, you can do a lot in 4 years, So I think realigning some of the expectations, understanding that every role is temporary. I mean, every position is temporary, right? And so, to think that, I think too many people think that staffing a team is like checking a box, and it's more of an ongoing continuum. So, as soon as I get this person, we're going to be set. Yeah. Well, by the time you get that person, this person's going to leave. And then this person, it's a constant activity. And even when your team is set, you need to be thinking of developing leaders in pipeline who could take their positions when they leave, So staffing is an ongoing thing. It's not a one-time project or one-time thing. So I think that, right sizing expectations and being prepared for these transitions could be a couple ways to, prevent some of these things.
Yeah, that's good.
That's really good. Todd, I was thinking about when you said prepare for 3 to 5 years, that adds some relief, but also a really kind of cool accountability. If I choose to think about it, if I've got you for 3 years, what is my responsibility to make you, when you leave, did I do my job of making you better for your next role? And was I also prepared to bring up someone behind you? So it kind of adds a really cool, a coaching component. How much can I do as your leader in the time that I have you? Am I stewarding you to be the best you under my lead? That's the biggest compliment. I had a boss 1,000 years ago. It was if I build people that are better than me, I did my job. And that doesn't make me look weaker. That's a strength. I mean, that's a hard thing to do. But if I think about it, I only have you for a minute. And are you better after you leave, or did you leave because I was not great?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point, not to get too morbid, but, if we knew next week was our last week on earth, we would get a lot of things in line real quick. Right.
Yeah,
and I think
it's really good.
If you kind of put that, not that you're, necessarily expecting them to leave or they have to leave, but if you kind of put that expectation in your mind, I think you're right. I think it'll make you really make sure that, you have a great pipeline that's coming up behind these staff members.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Todd, we always ask everyone that comes on the lab, so we'd love to ask you, in your opinion and in your very unique background and expertise, what is one absolutely essential component of a healthy church?
I think fluidity in the body life of the church. So, how is a member is a congregant engaged in the life, beyond Sunday. And I think that's important now more than ever. Carrie Newhoff's coming out with some great stuff right now about attendance and engagement. And engagement is the new attendance.
Absolutely.
Attendance on a Sunday morning is meaning less and less. But how is the person or the individual actually engaged in the life of the church? And I think, and I use the word fluidity because it's not so compartmentalized between Sunday services and then Wednesday night services, but it's fluid. I'm a part of the whole church. And as a part of that, I'm coming into the Sunday service and I'm going over to my friend's house for some community or our small group. I ran into another coworker I invited to church. I'm serving, there's a connectedness with the church. And I think right now, sadly, one of the things I see is that a lot of churches have lost the body life of the church. And, especially I think the average attendance right now, don't quote me on this, but I think it's 1.2 times a month. People are coming to church in person. So, you don't have people there, as many people on a Sunday. So what are you doing? How are you engaging that individual between Sundays? And I think the healthiest of churches have people that are still fluid in their engagement in the body, in the life of the church.
Yeah, we're going to jump into our final 5 rapid fire. We like to close this way. And so these are going to come at you quick.
Okay.
First one's this: one book you'd recommend to church leaders.
I think The Bait of Satan, John Bevere.
Okay.
It's a book about how you handle offense, being offended, taking offense, how you handle that in a biblical way, how we relate to each other. And I think right now, just with a lot of, everything going on in church world and in culture, politically, I just see more and more. I think we're more prone to take offense to things, and I think that this book lays out a great framework for how we should handle that biblically.
It's awesome. What is the last thing that you listened to on Spotify? Especially given your musical background, I got high expectations on this answer.
Oh man, Spotify. All right,
or Apple Music. Whatever you listen to music,
Whatever it is, gotta be
I
rap.
actually do listen to more Apple Music, but I actually did just listen to something on Spotify this week. Believe it or not, Tuesday, I help out a church with their worship department, and we had our first Christmas planning meeting.
Oof.
So somebody, it's Christmas is coming fast, folks.
Yep.
But somebody
reminder.
yeah, little plug there.
Yeah.
Somebody sent me a song idea though from Chris Davenport. He came out with an album this year, and it was a song called "Behold Him." But that would have been the last thing I listened to on Spotify.
Nice, love it. What is your favorite piece of technology? And you can't. Sorry, we do have a rule. You can't see your phone.
Oh,
I know.
That's the first thing that came to my mind.
I know, because everyone says my phone. There's a computer in your pocket.
Kind of all encompassing, right?
Far too obvious.
I think it's got to be the car.
Oh, I like it.
A vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do much without
First
getting
time
around.
that's been said. I love it. That's great.
Very practical.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have 3 kids and 1 on the way, so I'll even say the minivan specifically.
Ooh.
I'll say it proudly.
I got love for the minivan. Yeah, I got love for it. All right. What's a quote or piece of advice that has stuck with you over the years?
A quote that has stuck with me, I think, is Craig Rochelle said this on one of his podcasts a long time ago, but it's distance creates extremes. Distance creates extremes. So the application of that would be, it's kind of in light of cancel culture. Maybe you have a problem with another person, or, we can begin to create caricatures of each other because of our distance between us and that person. And so that's always stuck with me. Whenever I see any kind of people issues arise, I just want to get those people as close together as quick as possible.
Yeah.
So distance creates extremes.
That's really good. All right, last one. One thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders.
Yeah, I think I would say two things if I'm allowed, but
we'll allow it.
One thing I kind of already mentioned, but I think now is the time to think outside the box when it comes to ministry strategy, reaching people. We've all been given a blank slate right now, kind of have a blank canvas. And I think we need to not have any sacred cows, and we need to think outside the box if we're going to really reach this next generation and kind of shift our thinking in the way we do things in church. That would be kind of a practical thing. I think from a spiritual component, if I was talking to church leaders, I would say don't isolate yourself. With pain comes the tendency to isolate. And I think a lot of church leaders have gone through a lot of pain the last few years, and isolation never leads to anywhere good. So who are the people around you that are building you up? The people around you that you truly do not have a wall up, and really lean into that, even if it's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's good, man. Well, can you give our listeners just some places that they can connect with you, find out more, hear about maybe they have staffing needs, want to connect with you? Would love to give people that.
Yeah, our website's the best place, rukesgroup.com, RUKES group.com. Find out all the information of what we're doing at Rukes Group and a place to connect with us there. Could also check us out on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. There's a lot of stuff on there to check out. And then if anybody ever wants to email me directly, my email is todd@rukesgroup.com. So would love to connect. If you have a staffing need, even if you, one of the services we offer is to review your staff. We do like a staffing and organizational design review to see if your staff is actually structured properly to meet your goals and your mission. But obviously staff search as well. So if you're looking for any key leaders or pastors, we'd love to help you out with our networks and candidates.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're going to link to all of that so that people can connect with you. But we appreciate you taking the time today to chat and to share your wisdom, to share a lot of what you've learned too from both walking in the shoes of church staff, leading church staff, and then getting kind of an outside view as well and building and strengthening church leaders. So we appreciate your time, and we appreciate those of you listening as well or watching this. We hope it's been helpful. If it is, go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, share, do all of the things. We would love to get these conversations into the hands of as many church leaders and pastors as possible, which helps with our goal of empowering healthy churches. So we'd love for you to do that. We're thankful for you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.